Oh, I can't see this at all. This game is so loud. Like, really loud. I don't know why this game is so loud. Okay. This beat sucks. Let's just do all these. Oh, I'm missing one, that's why. Alright. The National Railroad Passenger Corporation, doing business as Amtrak, is the national passenger railroad company of the United States. It operates intercity rail service in 46 of the 48 contiguous U.S. states and 3 Canadian provinces. Amtrak is a portmanteau of the word America and track. Founded in 1971 as a quasi-public corporation to operate many U.S. passenger rail routes, Amtrak receives a combination of state and federal subsidies but is managed as a for-profit organization. The company's headquarters is located 1 block west of Union Station in Washington, D.C. Amtrak is headed by the board of directors, 2 of whom are the Secretary of Transportation and the CEO of Amtrak, while the other 8 members are nominated to serve a term of 5 years. Amtrak's network includes over 500 stations along 21,400 miles or 34,000 kilometers of track. It directly owns approximately 623 miles or 1,003 kilometers of this track and operates an additional 132 miles of track. The remaining mileage is over rail lines owned by other railroad companies. While most track speeds are limited to 79 miles per hour, 127 kilometers an hour, or less, several lines have been upgraded to support top speeds of 110 miles per hour, 180 kilometers an hour, and parts of the Northeast Corridor support top speeds of 160 miles per hour or 260 kilometers an hour. In fiscal year 2022, Amtrak served 22.9 million passengers and had $22.1 billion in revenue, with more than 17,100 employees. As of fiscal year 2021, nearly 87,000 come from the 10 largest metropolitan areas, and 83% of passengers travel on routes shorter than 400 miles or 645 kilometers. Now, the history of Amtrak. Private passenger service. In 1916, 98% of all commercial intercity travelers in the United States moved by rail, and the remaining 2% moved by inland waterways. Nearly 42 million passengers used railways as primary transportation. Passenger trains were owned and operated by the same privately owned companies that operated freight trains. As the 20th century progressed, patronage declined in the face of competition from buses, air travel, and the car. New streamlined diesel powertrains, such as the Pioneer Zephyr, were popular with the traveling public, but could not reverse the trend. By 1940, railroads held 67% of commercial passenger miles in the United States. In real terms, passenger miles had fallen by 40% since 1916, from 42 billion to 25 billion. Traffic surged during World War II, which was aided by troop movement and gasoline rationing. The railroad's market share surged to 74% in 1945 with a massive 94 billion passenger miles. After the war, railroads rejuvenated their overworked and neglected passenger fleets with fast and luxurious streamliners. These new trains brought only temporary relief to the overall decline. Even as post-war travel exploded, passenger travel percentages of the overall market share fell to 46% by 1950 and 32% by 1957. The railroads had lost money on passenger services since the Great Depression, but deficits reached $723 million in 1957. For many railroads, these losses threatened financial viability. The causes of this decline were heavily debated. The national highway system and airports, both funded by the government, competed directly with the railroads, which, unlike the airline, bus, and trucking companies, paid for their own infrastructure. American car culture was also on the rise in the post-World War II years. Progressive-era rate regulation limited the railroads' ability to turn a profit. Railroads also faced antiquated work rules and inflexible relationships with trade unions. To take one example, workers continued to receive a day's pay for 100 to 150 miles, or 160 to 240 kilometers workdays. Streamliners covered that in 2 hours. Matters approached a crisis in the 1960s. Passenger service route miles fell from 107,000 miles, 172,000 kilometers in 1958, to 49,000 miles, 79,000 kilometers in 1970. Last full year of private operation. The diversion of most United States Post Office Department mail from passenger trains to trucks, airplanes, and freight trains in late 1967 deprived those trains of badly needed revenue. In direct response, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway filed to discontinue 33 of its remaining 39 trains, ending almost all passenger service on one of the largest railroads in the country. The equipment of the railroads had to order after World War II was now 20 years old, worn out, and in need of replacement. Formation. As passenger service declined, various proposals were brought forward to rescue it. The 1961 Doyle Report proposed that the private railroads pool their services into a single body. Similar proposals were made in 1965 and 1968, but failed to attract support. The federal government passed the High-Speed Ground Transportation Act of 1965 to fund pilot programs in the Northeast Corridor, but this did not address the passenger deficits. In late 1969, multiple proposals emerged in the United States Congress, including equipment subsidies, route subsidies, and lastly, a quasi-public corporation to take over the operation of intercity passenger trains. Matters were brought to a head in June 21, 1970, when the Penn Central, the largest railroad in the Northeast United States, and teetering on bankruptcy, filed to discontinue 34 of its passenger trains. In October 1970, Congress passed and President Richard Nixon signed into law against the objections of most of his advisors, the Rail Passenger Service Act. Proponents of the bill, led by the National Association of Railroad Passengers, sought government funding to ensure the continuation of passenger trains. They convinced the National Railroad Passenger Corporation, a quasi-public corporation that would be managed as a for-profit organization, but which would receive taxpayer funding and assume operations of intercity passenger trains. While many involved in drafting the bill did not believe the NRPC could actually be profitable, this was necessary in order for the White House and more conservative members of Congress to support the bill. Be right back, gotta get some water. There were several key provisions. Any railroad operating intercity passenger service could contract the NRPC, thereby joining the national system. The United States federal government, through the Secretary of Transportation, would own all the NRPC's issued and outstanding preferred stock. Participating railroads bought into the NRPC using a formula based on their recent intercity passenger losses. The purchase price would be satisfied either by cash or rolling stock. In exchange, the railroads received NRPC common stock. Any participating railroad was freed from the obligation to operate intercity passenger service after May 1st, 1971, except for those services chosen by the Department of Transportation, DOT, as part of the basic system of service and paid for by NRPC using its federal funds. Railroads that chose not to join the NRPC system were required to continue operating their existing passenger service until 1975, at which time they could pursue the customary Interstate Commerce Commission, ICC, approval process for any discontinuance or alteration to the service. Of the 26 railroads still offering intercity passenger service in 1970, only 6 declined to join the NRPC. Oh. The music stopped. Alright, let's change this tune. Next tune. Nearly everyone involved expected the experiment to be short-lived. Nixon administration and many Washington insiders viewed the NRPC as a politely expedient way for the President and Congress to give passenger trains a last hurrah, as demanded by the public. They expected the NRPC to quietly disappear as public interest waned. After Fortune magazine exposed the manufactured mismanagement in 1974, Louis W. Menck, chairman of the Burlington Northern Railroad, remarked that the story was undermined by the scheme to dismantle Amtrak. Proponents also hoped that the government intervention would be brief and that Amtrak would soon be able to support itself. Neither view had proposed to be correct. Popular support allowed Amtrak to continue in operation longer than critics imagined, while financial results made passenger train service returning to private railroad operators infeasible. Selection of initial routes. The Rail Passenger Service Act gave the Secretary of Transportation all that time, John A. Volpe, 30 days to produce an initial draft of the endpoints of the routes like NRPC would be required by law to serve for 4 years. On November 24, Volpe presented his initial draft consisting of 27 routes to Nixon, which he believed would make a $24 million profit by 1975. The Office of Management and Budget, however, believed Volpe and the DOT's analysis was far too optimistic, and Director George Shultz, arguing to cut the number of routes around by half, around half. Nixon agreed that Shultz and the public draft presented by Volpe on November 30th consisted of only 16 routes. Nixon agreed with Shultz. The initial reaction to this heavily cut-back proposed system from the public, the press, and Congress were strongly negative. It made front-page headlines across the country, and it was quickly leaked that the DOT had wanted a far larger system than the White House would approve of. The ICC produced its own report on December 29th criticizing the proposed draft and arguing for the inclusion of 15 additional routes, giving further ammunition to the congressmen who wanted to expand the system. Further wrangling between the DOT and the White House produced a final list of routes on January 28, 1971, adding 5 additional routes to the November 30th draft. These required routes only had their endpoints specified. The selection of the actual routes to be taken between the endpoints was left to the NRPC, which had just 3 months to decide them before it was due to start service. Consultants from McKinsey & Company were hired to perform this task, and the results were publicly announced on March 22nd. At the same time, the NRPC had hired Lippincott and Margulies to create a brand for it and replace its original working brand name of Railpax. On March 30th, L&M's work was presented to the NRPC's Board of Incorporators, who unanimously agreed on the headless arrow logo, and on the new brand name Amtrak, a portmanteau of the words America and track. The latter itself, a sensational spelling of track. The name change was publicly announced less than 2 weeks before operations began. The 1970s, the Rainbow Era. Amtrak began operations on May 1st, 1971. Amtrak received no rail tracks or rights-of-way at its inception. All of Amtrak's routes were continuations of prior services, although Amtrak pruned about half the passenger rail network. Of the 366 train routes that operated previously, Amtrak continued only 184. Several major corridors became freight only, including the ex-New York Central Railroad's water level route, from New York to Ohio, and Grand Trunk Western's Railroad's Chicago to Detroit route. The reduced passenger rail schedules created a confusion amongst staff. At some station, Amtrak service was available only late at night or early in the morning, prompting complaints from passengers. Disputes from freight railroads over track usage caused some services to be rerouted, temporarily canceled, or replaced with buses. On the other hand, the creation of the Los Angeles-Seattle Coast Star Line from 3 formerly separate train routes was an immediate success, resulting in an increase to daily service by 1973. Needing to operate only half the train routes that had operated previously, Amtrak would lease around 1,200 of the best passenger cars from the 3,000 that the private railroads owned. All were air-conditioned and 90% were easy-to-maintain stainless steel. When Amtrak took over, passenger cars and locomotives initially retained the paint schemes and logos of their former owners, which resulted in Amtrak running trains with mismatched colors, the Rainbow Era. In mid-1971, Amtrak began purchasing some of the equipment it had leased, including 286 EMD E&F unit diesel locomotives, 30 GG1 electric locomotives, and 1,290 passenger cars. By 1970, the official Amtrak color scheme was painted on most Amtrak equipment and newly purchased locomotives, and the rolling stock began appearing. Amtrak inherited problems with the train stations, most notably deferred maintenance. and redundant facilities from the compelling railroads that once served the same communities. Chicago is a prime example. On the day prior to Amtrak's inception, intercity passenger trains used 4 different Chicago terminals: LaSalle, Dearborn, Northwest Station, Central, and Union. Central and Union. The trains at LaSalle remained there, as their operator, Rock Island, could not afford to opt into Amtrak. Of all the trains serving Dearborn Station, Amtrak retained only a pair of the Santa Fe stations, which relocated to Union Station, beginning with the first Amtrak departures on May 1st, 1971. Dearborn Station closed after the last 3 Amtrak trains on the Santa Fe arrived in Chicago on May 2nd. None of the intercity trains that had served Northwestern Station became part of the Amtrak system, and that terminal became commuter only after May 1. The trains serving Central Station continued to use that station until an alternate routing was adopted in March 1972. In New York City, Amtrak had to maintain 2 stations, Penn and Grand Central. Due to the lack of track connections to bring trains from upstate New York into Penn Station, a problem that was rectified once the Empire Connection was built in 1991, the Amtrak Standard Stations program was launched in 1978 and proposed to build a standardized station design across the system with an aim to reduce cost, speed, construction, and improve its corporate image. However, the cash-strapped railroad would ultimately build relatively few of these standard stations. Amtrak soon had the opportunity to acquire rights-of-way. Following the bankruptcy of several northeastern railroads in the early 1970s, including Penn Central, which owned and operated the Northeast Corridor, NEC, Congress passed the Railroad Revitalization and Regulatory Reform Act of 1976. A large part of the legislation was directed to the creation of Conrail, but the law also enabled the transfer of the portions of the NEC not already owned by state authorities to Amtrak. Amtrak acquired the majority of the NEC on April 1st, 1976. The portion in Massachusetts is owned by the Commonwealth and managed by Amtrak. The route from New Haven to New Rochelle is owned by New York's Metropolitan Transportation Authority and the Connecticut Department of Transportation as the New Haven Line. This main line became Amtrak's dual asset and helped the railroad generate revenue. While the NEC ridership and revenues were higher than any other segment of the system, the cost of operating and maintaining the corridor proved to be overwhelming. As a result, Amtrak's federal subsidy was increased dramatically. In subsequent years, other short route segments not needed for freight operations were transferred to Amtrak. Citation needed. In its first decade, Amtrak fell far short of financial independence, which continues today, but it did find modest success rebuilding trade. Outside factors discouraged competing transports such as fuel shortages, which increased costs of automobile and airline travel, and strikes, which disrupted airline operations. Investments in Amtrak's track equipment and information also made Amtrak more relevant to America's transportation needs. Amtrak's ridership increased from 16.6 million in 1972 to 21 million in 1981. In February 1978, Amtrak moved its headquarters to 400 North Capitol Street Northwest, Washington, D.C. Just a moment. Let's change the song. '80s and 1990s, the building area. In 1982, former Secretary of the Navy and retired Southern Railway head William Graham Claytor, Jr. came out of retirement to lead Amtrak. During this time at Southern, Claytor was a vocal critic of Amtrak's prior managers, who all came from non-railroading backgrounds. Transportation Secretary Drew Lewis cited this criticism as a reason why the Democrat Claytor was acceptable to the Reagan White House. Despite frequent clashes with the Reagan administration over funding, Claytor enjoyed a good relationship with Lewis, John H. Reilly, the head of the Federal Railroad Administration (FRA), and with members of Congress. Limited funding led Claytor to use short-term debt to fund operations. Building on mechanical developments in the 1970s, high-speed Washington-New York Metroliner service was improved with new equipment and faster schedules. Travel time between New York and Washington, D.C. was reduced to under 3 hours due to system improvements and limited stop service. This improvement was cited as a reason why Amtrak grew its share of intercity trips between the cities along the corridor. Elsewhere in the country, demand for passenger rail service resulted in the creation of 5 new state-supported routes in California, Illinois, Missouri, Oregon, and Pennsylvania, for a total of 15 state-supported routes. Amtrak added 2 trains in 1983, the California Zephyr between Oakland and Chicago via Denver, and revived the Auto Train, a unique service that carries both passengers and their vehicles. Amtrak advertised it as a great way to avoid traffic along the I-95 running between Lorton, Virginia, near Washington, D.C., and Sanford, Florida, near Orlando, on the Silver Star alignment. In the 1980s and 1990s, stations in Baltimore, Chicago, and Washington, D.C. received major rehabilitation, and the Empire Connection Tunnel opened in 91, allowing Amtrak to consolidate all New York services at Penn Station. Despite the improvements, Amtrak's ridership stagnated at roughly 20 million passengers per year amid uncertain government aid from 1981 to about 2000. In the early 1990s, Amtrak tested several different high-speed trains from Europe on the Northeastern Corridor. An X2000 train was leased from Sweden for test runs from October 92 to January 93, followed by revenue service between Washington, D.C. and New York City from February to May and August to September 1993. Siemens showed the Ice 1 train from Germany, organizing the Ice Train North America Tour, which started to operate on the Northeast Corridor on July 3, 1993. In 1993, Thomas Downs succeeded Claytor as Amtrak's 5th president. The stated goal remained operational self-sufficiency. By this time, however, Amtrak had a large overhang of debt from years of underfunding. In mid-1990s, Amtrak suffered through a serious cash crunch. Under Downs, Congress included a provision in the Taxpayer Relief Act of 1997 that resulted in Amtrak receiving a $2.3 billion tax refund that resolved their cash crisis. However, Congress also instituted a glide path to financial self-sufficiency, excluding Railroad Retirement Tax Act payments. George Warrington became the 6th president in 1998 with a mandate to make Amtrak financially self-sufficient. Under Warrington, the company tried to expand its express freight shipping, placing Amtrak in competition with the host freight railroads and the trucking industry. On March 9, 1999, Amtrak unveiled its plan for the Acela Express, a high-speed train on the Northeast Corridor between Washington, D.C. and Boston. Several changes were made to the corridor to make it suitable for high-speed electric trains. The North End Electrification Project extended existing electrification from New Haven, Connecticut to Boston to complete the overhead power supply along the 454-mile, 731-kilometer route, and several grade crossings were improved or removed. 2000s. Growth in the 21st century. Ridership increased during the first decade of the 21st century after the implementation of capital improvements in the NEC and rises in automobile fuel costs. The inauguration of the high-speed Acela in late 2000s generated considerable publicity and led to a major ridership gain. However, through the late 1990s and very early 21st century, Amtrak could not add sufficient express freight revenue or cut sufficient other expenditures to break even. By 2002, it was clear that Amtrak could not achieve self-sufficiency, but Congress continued to authorize funding and release Amtrak from the requirement. In early 2002, David L. Gunn replaced Warrington as the 7th president. In a departure from his predecessor's promise to make Amtrak self-sufficient in the short term, Gunn argued that no form of passenger transportation in the United States is self-sufficient as the economy is currently structured. Highways, airports, and air traffic control all require large government expenditures to build and operate. Coming from the Highway Trust Fund and Aviation Trust Fund paid for by user fees, highway fuel, and road taxes, and, in the case of the General Fund, from general taxation. Gunn dropped most freight express business and worked to eliminate deferred maintenance. A plan by the Bush administration, quote, to privatize parts of the national passenger rail service and spin off other parts to partial state ownership, unquote, provided disagreement within Amtrak's board of directors. In late 2005, Gunn was fired. Gunn's replacement, Alexander Comont, 2006 to 2008, was committed to operating a national rail network, and like Gunn, opposed the notion of putting the Northeastern Corridor under separate ownership. He said that shedding the system's long-distance routes would amount to selling the national assets that are on par with national parks, and that Amtrak's abandonment of these routes would be irreversible. In late 2006, Amtrak unsuccessfully sought annual congressional funding of $1 billion for 10 years. In early 2007, Amtrak employed 20,000 people in 46 states and served 25 million passengers a year, its highest number since its founding in 1970. Politico noted a key problem. The rail system chronically operates in the red. A pattern has emerged. Congress overrides cutbacks demanded by the White House and appropriates enough funds to keep Amtrak from plunging into insolvency, but Amtrak advocates say that is not enough to fix the system's woes. Joseph H. Boardman replaces Kumant as president and CEO in late 2008. In 2011, Amtrak announced its intentions to improve and expand the high-speed rail corridor from Penn Station in New York under the Hudson River in new tunnels and double-tracking the line to Newark, New Jersey, following the Gateway program. Initially estimated cost $13.5 billion, equal to $18 billion in 2023. From May 2011 to May 2012, Amtrak celebrated its 40th anniversary from festivities across the country that started on National Train Day, May 7, 2011. A commemorative book entitled Amtrak, An American Story was published. A documentary was created. 6 locomotives were painted in Amtrak's 4 prior paint schemes, and an exhibit train toured the country visiting 45 communities and welcoming more than 85,000 visitors. After years of almost revolving door CEOs at Amtrak, in December 2013, Boardman was named Railroader of the Year by Railway Age magazine, which noted that with over 5 years on the job, he is the second longest serving head of Amtrak since it was formed more than 40 years ago. On December 9, 2015, Boardman announced in a letter to employees that he would be leaving Amtrak in September 2016. He had advised that the Amtrak board of directors of his decision the previous week. On August 19, 2016, the Amtrak board of directors named former Norfolk Southern Railway president and CEO Charles Wick Moorman as Boardman's successor with an effective date of September 1st, 2016. During this term, Moorman took no salary and said that he saw his role as one of a transitional CEO who would reorganize Amtrak before turning it over to new leadership. Oh, fuck. In June 2017, it was announced that former Delta and Northwestern Airlines CEO Richard Anderson would become Amtrak's next president and CEO. Anderson began the job on July 12th, assuming the title of president immediately and serving alongside Moorman as co-CEOs until the end of the year. On April 15, 2020, Atlas Air Chairman, President, and CEO William Flynn was named Amtrak President and CEO. In addition to Atlas Air, Flynn has held senior roles at CSX Transportation, Sea Land Services, and Geologistics Corps. Anderson would remain with Amtrak as a senior advisor until December 2020. As Amtrak approached profitability in 2020, the company undertook planning to expand and create new intermediate distance corridors across the country. Included were several new services in Ohio, Tennessee, Colorado, Minnesota, among other states. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Amtrak continued operation as an essential service. It started requiring face coverings the week of May 17th and limited sales to 50% of capacity. Most long-distance routes were reduced to 3 weekly round trips in October 2020. In March 2021, following President Joe Biden's American Jobs Plan announcement, Amtrak CEO Bill Flynn outlined a proposal called Amtrak Connects US that would expand state-supported intercity corridors with an infusion of upfront capital assistance. This would expand service to cities including Las Vegas, Phoenix, Baton Rouge, Nashville, Chattanooga, Louisville, Columbus, Ohio, Wilmington, North Carolina, Cheyenne, Montgomery, Concord, and Scranton. Also, in March 2021, Amtrak announced plans to return 12 of its long-distance routes to daily schedules later in the spring. Most of these routes were restored to daily service in late May 2021. However, a resurgence of the virus caused by the Omicron variant caused Amtrak to modify and/or suspend many of these routes again from January to March 2022. Oh, fuck. Let's switch it up. Let's switch up some music again. Operations. Routes. Amtrak is required by law to operate a national route system. Amtrak has presence in 46 of the 48 contiguous states, as well as the District of Columbia, with only throughway connecting services in Wyoming and no services in South Dakota. Amtrak services fall into 3 groups. Short-haul service in the Northeast Corridor, state-supported short-haul service outside the Northeast Corridor, and medium and long-haul service known within Amtrak as the National Network. Amtrak receives federal funding for the vast majority of its operations, including in the central spine of the Northeast Corridor, as well as for its national network system. In addition to the federally funded routes, Amtrak partners with transportation agencies in 18 states to operate other short and medium-haul routes outside of the Northeast Corridor, some of which connected or are extensions from it. In addition to its intercity services, Amtrak also operates commuter service under contract for 3 public agencies: the Mark Penn Line in Maryland, Shoreline East in Connecticut, Metrolink in Southern California. Service on the Northeast Corridor between Boston and Washington, D.C., as well as between Philadelphia and Harrisburg, is powered by overhead lines. For the rest of the system, diesel-fueled locomotives are used. Routes vary widely in the frequency of service, from 3 days a week trains on the Sunset Limited to several times per hour on the Northeast Corridor. For areas not served by trains, Amtrak Thruway routes provide guaranteed connections to trains via buses, vans, ferries, and other modes. The most popular and heavily used services are those running on the NEC, including the Acela and Northeast Regional. The NEC runs between Boston and Washington, D.C., via New York City and Philadelphia. Some services continue into Virginia. The NEC service is announced for 4.4 million of Amtrak's 12 million passengers in fiscal year 2021. Outside the NEC, the most popular services are the short-haul corridors in California, the Pacific Surfliner, Capital Corridor, and San Joaquin's, which are supplanted by an extensive network of connected buses. Together, California Corridor trains accounted for a combined 2.35 million passengers in fiscal year 2021. Other popular routes include the Empire service between New York City and Niagara Falls via Albany and Buffalo, which carried 613.2 thousand passengers in fiscal year 2021. The Keystone services between New York City and Harrisburg via Philadelphia that carried 394.3 thousand passengers that same year. Four of the six busiest stations by boardings are the NEC, New York Penn Station first, Washington Union Station second, Philadelphia 30th Street Station third, and Boston South Station fifth. The other two are Chicago Union Station fourth, and Los Angeles Union Station sixth. On-time performance. On-time performance is calculated differently from airlines than for Amtrak. A plane is considered on time if it arrives within 15 minutes of the schedule. Amtrak uses a sliding scale, with trips under 250 miles, 400 kilometers, considered late if they are more than 10 minutes behind schedule. Up to 30 minutes for trips over 551 miles, 887 kilometers in length. Outside the Northeast Corridor and stretches of track in Southern California and Michigan, most Amtrak trains run on tracks owned and operated by privately owned freight railroads. BNSF is the largest host to Amtrak routes, with 6.3 million train miles. Freight rail operators are required under federal law to give dispatching preference to Amtrak trains. However, Amtrak was accused freight railroads of violating or skirting these regulations, resulting in passenger trains waiting for freight traffic to clear the track. The railroad's dispatching practices were investigated in 2008, resulting in stricter laws about train priority. Subsequently, Amtrak's overall on-time performance went up from 74.7% in fiscal 2008 to 84.7% in 2009, with long-distance trains and others outside the NEC seeing the greatest benefit. The Missouri River Runner jumped from 11% to 95%, becoming one of Amtrak's best performers. The Texas Eagle went from 22.4% to 96.7%, and the California Zephyr, with a 5% on-time record in 2008, went up to 78.3%. However, this improved performance coincided with general economic downturn, resulting in the lowest freight rail traffic volume since at least 1988, meaning less freight traffic to impede passenger traffic. In 2018, Amtrak began issuing report cards rating each host railroad similar to students, based on the railroad's impact to on-time performance. The first report card issued in March 2018 includes one A given to Canadian Pacific and two Fs given to Canadian National and Norfolk Southern. Amtrak's 2020 host report card gives Canadian Pacific, Canadian National an A, BNSF and CSX a B, Union Pacific a C+, Norfolk Southern a D-. Amtrak's 2023 host report card gives Canadian Pacific Kansas City an A, CSX and Canadian National a B+, BNSF a B, Norfolk Southern a B-, and Union Pacific a C-. Amtrak's median on-time performance between 2018 and 2020 was 74.5%, reaching a high of 80% in 2020. It was highest on the Northeast Corridor, 81.3%. The vast majority of these hours of delay, about 57.5% on average, were caused by the host railroad. Long-distance routes perform similarly to the total weighted on-time percentage. Switch up the music once more. Oh, it's so scary. It's such scary music. Ridership. Amtrak carried 15.8 million passengers in 1972, its first full year of operation. Ridership has increased steadily ever since, carrying a record 32 million passengers in fiscal year FY 2019, more than double the total in 1972. For fiscal year ending on September 30th, 2020, Amtrak reported 16.8 million passengers, with a decline resulting from the effects of COVID-19 pandemic. FY 2021 saw ridership decrease more, with 12.2 million passengers reported. FY 2020 saw an increase to 22.9 million passengers, further increasing to 28.6 million passengers in FY 2023. In FY 2024, Amtrak ridership increased to 32.8 million passengers, an all-time record. Guest rewards. Amtrak's loyalty program, Guest Rewards, is similar to the frequent flyer programs of many airlines. Guest Rewards members accumulate points by riding Amtrak and through other activities, and can redeem these points for free Amtrak tickets and other rewards. Rail passes. Amtrak offers the U.S. Rail Pass, valid for 10 segments rides in 30 days, and the California Rail Pass, which is valid for 7 days of travel in a period of 21 days. The lines. Along the NEC and in several other areas, Amtrak owns 730 miles, 1,170 kilometers, including 17 tunnels consisting of 29.7 miles, 47.8 kilometers of track, and 1,186 bridges, including the famous Hell Gate Bridge, consisting of 42.5 miles, 68.4 kilometers of track. And several places, primarily in New England, Amtrak leases track, providing track maintenance and controlling train movements. Most often, these tracks are leased from the state, regional, or local governments. The lines are further divided into services. Amtrak owns and operates the following lines. Just a second. The Northeast Corridor. The Northeast Corridor between Washington, D.C. and Boston via Baltimore, Philadelphia, Newark, New York, and Providence is largely owned by Amtrak, 363 of 457 miles, working cooperatively with several state and regional commuter agencies. Between New Haven, Connecticut, and New Rochelle, New York, Northeast Corridor trains travel on the Metro North Railroad's New Haven line, which is owned and operated by the Connecticut Department of Transportation and the Metropolitan Transportation Authority. The Keystone Corridor. Amtrak owns the 104.2-mile line from Philadelphia to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. As a result of an investment partnership with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, signal and track improvements were completed in October 2006 that allow all-electric service with a top speed of 110 miles per hour, 180 kilometers an hour, to run along the corridor. The Empire Corridor. Amtrak owns the 11-mile, 18-kilometer between New York Penn Station and Spuyten Duyvil, New York. In 2012, Amtrak leased the 94 miles, 151 kilometers between Poughkeepsie, New York, and Schenectady, New York, from owner CSX. In addition, Amtrak owns the tracks across the Whirlpool Rapids Bridge and short approach sections near it. The Michigan Line. Amtrak acquired the 98 miles of Porter, Indiana to Kalamazoo, Michigan section of the former Michigan Central Main Line from Conrail in 1976. The New Haven Springfield Line. Amtrak purchased the 62 miles, 100 kilometers between New Haven and Springfield from Penn Central in 1976. And the Post Road Branch, 12.42 miles, 19.99 kilometers, Castelton-on-Hudson to Rensselaer, New York. In addition to these lines, Amtrak owns station and yard tracks in Chicago, Los Angeles, New Orleans, New York City, Oakland, Kirkham Street Yard, Orlando, Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. Amtrak leases station and yard tracks in Hialeah near Miami, Florida, from the state of Florida. Citation needed. Amtrak owns New York Penn Station, Philadelphia 30th Street Station, Baltimore Penn Station, and Providence Station. It also owns Chicago Union Station, formerly through a wholly owned subsidiary, the Chicago Union Station Company, until absorbed by Amtrak in 2017. Through the Washington Terminal Company, in which it owns 99.7% interest, it owns the rail infrastructure around Washington Union Station. It holds a 99% interest in 30th Street Limited, a partnership responsible for redeveloping the area in and around 30th Street Station. Amtrak also owns passenger railroad insurance. Service lines. Amtrak organizes its business into 6 service lines, which are treated like divisions at most companies. There are 3 operating service lines: Northeast Corridor, which operates Amtrak's high-speed Acela and Northeast Regional trains, state-supported, which provides service on corridor routes of less than 750 miles and are funded entirely by state governments since 2008. And Long Distance, which operates routes over 750 miles and receives financial support from the federal government. Additionally, there are 3 service lines involved in activities other than operating Amtrak's trains. They are ancillary, which includes operating commuter trains under contract, establishing Amtrak throughway connecting services, operating charter trains, and hauling private rail cars. Real estate and commercial, which manages property owned by Amtrak, including leasing space to other businesses inside stations, and infrastructure access reimbursable, which charges other railroads for access to Amtrak-owned tracks and performs work that can be reimbursed by other railroads or state governments. Net revenue generated by these services lines is used to fund Amtrak's other operations. Rolling stock. Amtrak operates a fleet of 2,142 railway cars and 425 locomotives for revenue runs and services, collectively called rolling stock. Notable examples include the GE Genesis and Siemens Charger diesel locomotives, the Siemens ACS-64 electric locomotive, the Am Fleet series of single-level passenger cars, the Superliner series of double-decker passenger cars, 20 Acela Express high-speed train set. Amtrak also operates 196 locomotives, and rail cars owned wholly by state partners. The railroad is currently working to replace its fleet, spending $2.4 billion on 28 Avelia Liberty train sets for its flagship Acela service and $7.3 billion for 65 Aero train sets for other Northeast Corridor services. Additionally, California, Northern Carolina, and a group of Midwestern states purchased Siemens Ventures train sets for use on routes operated by Amtrak in their states, which started entering service in 2022. In 2023, Amtrak announced it had made a request for proposals, looking to replace hundreds of rail cars used on long-distance routes. Let's change up the music once again. Ding, ding, ding. Rockin' tunes. Classes of service. Amtrak offers 4 classes of service: first class, sleeper service, business class, and coach class. First class service is only offered on the Acela. Seats are larger than those of business class and come in a variety of seating styles: single, facing singles with table; double, facing doubles with table, and wheelchair accessible. First class is located in a separate car from business class and is located at the end of the train to reduce the number of passengers walking in the aisles. A car attendant provides passengers with a hot towel service, a complimentary mirror, and alcoholic beverages. First class passengers have access to lounges located at most larger stations. The sleeper service. Private room accommodations on long-distance trains, including roomettes, bedrooms, bedroom suites, accessible bedrooms, and on some trains, family bedrooms. Included in the price of a room are attended services, and on most routes, full hot meals. At night, attendants convert rooms into sleeping areas with fold-down beds and linens. Shower facilities with towels and bar of soap are available. Complimentary juice, coffee, and bottled water are included as well. Sleeper car passengers have access to all passenger facilities aboard the train. Sleeper service passengers have access to lounges located at selected stations. Business class. Business class seating is offered on the Acela, Northeast Regional, many short-haul corridor trains, and some long-distance trains. It is the standard class of service on the Acela. On all other trains where it is offered, business class is located in a dedicated car or section of the train. While the specific features vary by route, many include extra legroom and complimentary non-alcoholic drinks. Seats in business class recline and feature a fold-down tray table, footrest, individual reading light, and power outlets. Passengers have access to some lounges, but busier locations may exclude business class customers. The coach class. Coach is the standard class of service on all Amtrak trains except the Acela. Seats in coach recline and feature a fold-down tray table, footrest, individual reading light, power outlet. Coach cars on long-distance trains are configured with fewer seats per car so that passengers have additional legroom, seats which are equipped with leg rests. Some corridor and short-distance trains have one coach car designated as a quiet car, where loud conversation, phone calls, sound played from electronic devices are not permitted. Wi-Fi and electronic services. Amtrak first offered free Wi-Fi service to passengers aboard the Downeaster in 2008, the Acela and the Northeast Regional trains on the NEC in 2010, and the Amtrak Cascades in 2011. In February 2014, Amtrak rolled out Wi-Fi on corridor trains out of Chicago. When all Midwest cars offered the Amtrak Connect service, about 85% of all Amtrak passengers nationwide will have Wi-Fi access. As of 2014, most Amtrak passengers have access to free Wi-Fi. The service has developed a reputation for being unreliable and slow due to its cellular network connection. On some routes, it is usually unusable, either freezing on the login page, or if it manages to log in, failing to provide any internet bandwidth. Routes with Wi-Fi are typical on the routes running east of the Mississippi River and the U.S. coastlines. West-east routes such as the Sunset Limited and Southwest Chief and Texas Eagle notably lack Wi-Fi, whether through Amtrak or using a private hotspot, as cell towers are not common on the rail paths through desert and mountain wilderness. Amtrak launching an e-ticketing service on the Downeaster in November 2011 and rolled it out nationwide on July 30th, 2012. Amtrak officials said the system gives more accurate knowledge in real time of who is on the train, which greatly improves the safety and security of passengers. En route reporting of onboard equipment problems to mechanical crews, which may result in faster resolutions of the issue and more efficient financial reporting. Baggaging and cargo services. Amtrak allows carry-on baggaging on all routes. Services with baggage cars allow checked bags at select stations. With the passenger at the Wicked Amendment in 2010, passengers are allowed to put lawfully owned, unloaded firearms in checked Amtrak baggage, reversing a decade-long ban on such carriage. The Amtrak Express Cargo Service provides small package and less than truckload shipping between most Amtrak stations that handle checked baggaging over 100 cities. Cargo travels alongside checked luggage and baggage cars. Service and hours vary by station. Limited by available equipment and staffing, nearly all stations with checked bag services can handle small packages, while large stations with forklifts can handle palletized shipments. Amtrak Express also offers station-to-station shipments of human remains to many cities. Amtrak is popular among bicycle touring enthusiasts due to ease of riding with a bike. In contrast to airlines, which require riders to dismantle their bicycles and place them in specialized bags, most Amtrak trains have onboard bike racks in either the coaches or checked baggage area. Bicycle reservations are required on most routes and cost up to $20. Labor issues. In the modern era, Amtrak faces a number of important labor issues. As of 23, the average Amtrak employee annual salary was $121,000 per year. In the area of pension funding, because the limitations originally imposed by Congress, most Amtrak workers were traditionally classified as railroad employees, and contributions to the railroad retirement system have been made for those employees. However, because the size of the contributions is determined on an industry-wide basis rather than reference to the employer for whom the employees work, some critics, such as the National Association of Railroad Passengers, maintain that Amtrak is subsidizing railroad pensions by as much as US $150 million a year. In recent times, efforts at reforming passenger rail have addressed labor issues. In 1997, Congress released Amtrak from the prohibition on contracting for labor outside the corporation and outside its unions, opening the door to privatization. Since that time, many of Amtrak's employees have been working without a contract. The most recent contract, signed in 1999, was mainly retroactive. Because of the fragmentation of railroad unions, Amtrak had 14 separate unions to negotiate with, including 27 separate contracts between them as of 2009. This makes it difficult to make substantial changes, in contrast to a situation where one union negotiates with one employer. Former Amtrak President Kumant followed a cooperative posture with Amtrak trade unions, ruling out plans to privatize large parts of Amtrak's unionized workforce. Man, that's a bit of a shorter paragraph, but one that punches a little above its weight. Okie doker. I think I missed the hat. I'm gonna push it over another one. The color of a rose is the color that's blue. Environmental impacts. Amtrak's environmental impact. Per passenger mile, Amtrak is 30 to 40% more energy efficient than commercial airlines and automotives overall. Though the exact figures of particular routes depending on load factor along with other vehicles, the electrified trains in the NEC are considerably more efficient than Amtrak's diesels and can feed energy captured from regenerative braking back to the electrical grid. Passenger rail is also very competitive with other modes in terms of safety per mile. In 2005, Amtrak's carbon dioxide equivalent emissions per passenger were 0.411 pounds per mile, or 0.116 kilograms per mile. For comparison, this is similar to a car with 2 people. About twice as high as the UK rail average, where more of the system is electrified. About 4 times the average US motor coach, and about 8 times a Finnish electric intercity train or fully loaded 50-seat coach. It is, however, about 2/3 of the raw CO2 equivalent emissions of long-distance domestic flight. Amtrak operates diesel, electric, and dual-mode diesel and electric locomotives on over 30 passenger train routes throughout the US and Canada. Diesel-powered engines produce more greenhouse gas emissions during operations than electric trains. As for the locational pollutions directly from Amtrak operations, their diesel trains cause more regional air pollution, impacting the ecosystems around the site of operation. Also, more stops along the train routes can lead to higher greenhouse gas emissions. Amtrak rail facilities located in Delaware were cited as the state's largest source of polychlorinated biphenyl (PCB) contamination into the Delaware River, which build up in the tissue of animals and are human carcinogens. Environmental impact on Amtrak. Amtrak railways and surrounding infrastructure are susceptible to degradation by natural causes over time. Railways experience water damage from climate change, backed increases in rainfall in wet areas, and rail buckling caused by hotter and drier seasons in naturally dry areas. In September 21, the remnants of Hurricane Ida flooded the Amtrak northeastern corridor running from Boston to Washington, D.C., and caused it to shut down for an entire day. February 2023, heavy snowfall and debris on the track caused major disruptions from delays to cancellations. Rising summertime temperatures are causing an increase in railway buckles. A study conducted on railways in the north and the southeast United Kingdom found that when temperature changes become extreme in the summertime due to climate change, the tracks buckle due to outward force of the metal expanding in collaboration with the weight of the train car traffic. This causes speed restrictions to be put in place around certain temperature intervals, slowing travel time and lessening the number of train rides in a day. The study found that in 2004, 30,000 delay minutes were attributed to increasing heat, causing a total of over $1.7 million and total heat-related delay costs. Public funding. Amtrak receives annual appropriations from federal and state governments to supplement operating and capital programs. Fiscal year 2009, $1.488 billion. I think that's what that means. Yeah, in billions. 2010, 1.565. 2011, 1.4484. 2012, 1.418. 2013, 1.374. 2014, 1.370. 2015, 1.375. 2016, 1.837. 2017, 2.202. 2018, 2.447. 2019, 2.675. 2020, 3.018. 2021, 4.700, 2022, 6.731, and in 2023, 6.853. And then it goes into funding history, and controversy, and leadership. But I don't have time for that, so bye.